Okay, so thank you for joining us tonight for our virtual presentation on ghost stories. So, we all love hearing a good ghost story, whether around a campfire with friends or family. But why do we love to be scared or terrified by them? So, we have with us Professor Barney Haney from the University of Indianapolis, and he will help us examine what ghost stories can tell us about ourselves and our fears. So, welcome, Professor Haney.
Thank you, Candace. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Monticello Library, people of Monticello, and people of White County. What a treat tonight to get to spend some time with you and talk about one of my favorite things, ghost stories. And I totally want to get into that. But before I do, I want to just say, like, what a wonderful thing to get a reconnect with the people of White County when I was an undergrad at Purdue University in the Wayback Machine 18 years ago in 2002, I got a job with the Journal and Courier. I was studying as an undergrad to get a degree in agricultural journalism. I wanted to write about farming for newspapers. And I got a job with the Journal and Courier, and my beat to cover was White County. And so I would get out my car and run up 43 and go through Reynolds and Brookston and Chalmers. Boy, I covered the Wolcott 4th of July one year. Uh, when Brookston unveiled the beautiful clock on Main Street, I was there for that and got to talk to the local historian who was so sweet and so knowledgeable and had kept such good records about the town. Indiana Beach, of course, I'd covered that. But one story I want to tell you about, because this is ghost stories and this one still haunts me. So there was a big cat rescue that was just south of Monticello. I don't know if it's still there or not, but I went over there and I covered a story. And I'm really green, I'm a farm kid who has no idea what he's doing being a journalist, but he's trying really hard. And I'm in this big cat rescue and we get the gates shut behind us. And the first thing you see when you walked in there was two big Bengal tigers in that front cage. And I was like, oh my goodness, those gates are closed, so I don't get out. Like that tiger can totally get out of there. I'm going to get eaten alive. And I'm kind of terrified. And the guy is taking me around and we're walking around. There's a loop that goes around this big cat rescue facility. We're going around, they show me all the panthers and he had a wolf in there and a couple of bears. And we get back around to those Bengal tigers up front. We're right against the cage and it's right up on my left side. And he turns to me and he goes, hey, watch out now, that cat's going to spray. And I thought, what? I opened my mouth and I looked, I was like, what? I had no idea what spray meant. Well, I found out what spray meant pretty quick as that cat had its tail raised up in the air. And what spray is when it spritzes a big cloud of urine right on you. Had my mouth open, went all in my hair, all over my clothes. I'm covered in tiger urine. My next stop is I have to go interview the mayor of Monticello. And I was one thing, like I was such a poor college kid that like I couldn't afford the gas money to drive back to campus, change my clothes, get showered, get back and go to my cell. And there's no time anyways. I'd scheduled this interview and I they're on a time, schedule and I'm on a time schedule too. So I just walked right up in that I walked right up in the mayor's office just smelling like circus. I mean, just really musky circus smell. And everybody laughed so hard when I told them this story. And they were so sweet and welcoming and inviting to me. And I'd love to start by just saying thank you to White County for being good to a young farm kid who is figuring it out as a journalist. You were always so kind to me, always so welcoming, always so willing to talk and make time for me. And I really appreciated that because I was struggling to figure out what I was doing. I was really working hard, and you all supported me so much. So it's so cool on a personal level to get to talk to you tonight about ghost stories, right? It's always fun to talk about the things we love. And ghost stories are one of the things that I love. Now, I teach a class at the University of Indianapolis called Ghost Stories. And I started teaching it because I was teaching literature classes and the students were deadly afraid of literature. They're like, well, it's unapproachable. And I don't know why. They're like, well, it's old and it's frightening and it's all these things. But when I started teaching them ghost stories, they're like, oh no, we know the ghost. We'll totally approach that book. That's fine. We like that stuff. And I was like, great, because we can talk about all the big human issues still through the ghost story because it's in there. There's so many good insights into who we are as humans. And we see this like in every culture throughout history. They have ghost stories, and the reason being, I believe, is because we're haunted individuals, and there's something very important there, and we can't turn away from that ghost. We know there's something important. That's why we look. That's why we study it. That's why we're intrigued by it, right? And one of the stories that like got me started and really got me into ghosts was the first story in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Now, this story came out, or this book came out when I was a kid, 1981. This book came out the year I was born. And I grew up with it, and I was lucky enough to have it in my house. We had some books in our house when I was a kid. We didn't have a whole lot of them, but we had this one, and I read it again and again and again. If you look on the cover there, there's a barn, right? And there's this weird skull with the red and the blue and the corncob pipe. I grew up on a dairy farm, and right away I was like, ooh, these are stories from where I'm from. I'm from the country. Like, this is good. And then when I opened it up to the front, you can see here the little boy with the toe and the hoe. I was like, oh my goodness, that's me. Like, I'm going to have to watch out for this stuff. This story's directly talking to farm kids. Maybe I'm going to find a big toe out there on the farm. And I read these stories, and they scared the dickens out of me. And I would lay awake in my bed, all night long, freaked out by these things, and then continue to read them. And as I got older, like I'd go back to these things and look at them, and I'd look at them in a much different light. And I loved folk tales. And what I found about folk tales is that, they really capture like cultural values, cultural stresses and fears and traumas in a really economic fashion. They're very short stories often, and they get a lot done in the smallness of them. And the big toe is one I want to look at today to emphasize that point with you and kind of show you that there's a lot going on in a seemingly just silly ghost story. All right, silly and scary. All right, so prepare to get scared. I'm going to read to you now from Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, retold by Alvin Schwartz. So he took this folk tale and he changed some of the details for his retelling, so he felt it was relevant to 1981. So the big toe. A boy was digging at the edge of the garden when he saw a big toe. He tried to pick it up, but it was stuck to something. So he gave it a good hard jerk, and it came off in his hand. Then he heard something groan and scamper away. The boy took the toe into the kitchen and showed it to his mother. "It looks nice and plump," she said. "I'll put it in the soup and we'll have it for supper." That night, his father carved the toe into 3 pieces. They each had a piece. Then they did the dishes, and when it got dark, they went to bed. The boy fell asleep almost at once, but in the middle of the night, a sound awakened him. It was something out in the street. It was a voice, and it was calling to him. "Where is my toe?" it groaned. When the boy heard that, he got very scared, but he thought, "It doesn't know where I am. It'll never find me." Then he heard the voice once more, only now it was closer. "Where is my toe?" it groaned. The boy pulled the blankets over his head and closed his eyes. "I'll go to sleep," he thought. "When I wake up, it will be gone." But he heard the back door open, and again he heard the voice. "Where is my toe?" it groaned. Then the boy heard footsteps move through the kitchen, into the dining room, into the living room, into the front hall. Then slowly they climbed up the stairs. Closer and closer they came. Soon they were in the upstairs hall. Now they were outside his door. "Where is my toe?" the voice groaned. His door opened. Shaking with fear, he listened as the footsteps slowly moved through the dark toward his bed. Then they stopped. "Where is my toe?" the voice groaned. "You've got it." The end of this story, it says right in the text, jump out to the person nearest to you, grab a hold of them, and you shout, "You've got it," right? And it's meant to scare them, and that person, spills their popcorn or pees their pants, and we all laugh and have a jolly time of it, right? And it's hilarious. And the jump scare, it works so good. And I think there's something really interesting in that jump scare that's more than just the change in behavior of the storyteller. Of course, these stories and how we tell them affect that kind of like have that kind of effect at the end of the story. But there's something a little more there that I want us to discover. I'm going to pull up. I'm going to share my screen with you here. I'm going to pull up this story, and I've got it broken down into different colored parts. I'm going to move my screen a little bit so I can see it here. All right. So what I did with my students when we're like trying to examine, and get down into what a story is saying, I'm like, hey, break it into small parts and like, get in the weeds, trouble the details, because that's where the interesting things are going on here. So let's walk through this one together. All right. We read the story. We know the gist of it. We know what's happening. It's weird. There's a big toe. But let's break it down and see what's going on. So in this first section here that's old gold, we see the first sentence. A boy was digging at the edge of the garden when he saw a big toe. All right, so we have our character, a boy. He's got an action he's doing. We got the verb here, digging. We have a setting that we're at. We're in a garden, but we have this specific point of the garden we're at, the edge of the garden, and he sees this big toe. So when we break this down and kind of like think about it, the questions we can ask, well, why a boy, right? Why was it a boy that found it? There was two other characters in here of the mother and the father, but it's the boy that finds the toe. And so we ask, like, maybe we don't have the idea right away, but we say, well, what do we think of when we think boy? And we think denotations and connotations of words, right? So the denotations are the literal meanings, and the connotations are the associative meanings we put with it. And the denotative meaning is boy is just a young male, right? Young male sex. And the connotative meanings, though, when we think of boy, like, well, what are your associative meanings with boy? And some of them we might find here as well. When we think of any young child, we think, well, they're often innocent, and they're ignorant of a lot in the world, right? And they're curious. And maybe some of those things start to line up here. We see this boy and he's digging, and it's a curious thing that he's doing, and he's learning things going on. He's a youth, ignorant of the world. He's at the edge of a garden. And when we think of garden here, and we know, well, I'll tell you this story comes from Eastern, or it comes from European folklore, and it moves into Southeastern America, which is where it was very popular. And so when we know where the folktale comes from, the cultural background of it, we can think, well, what other gardens are in that culture's like mythology and their storytelling? What are gardens are important to them? And I think one of the gardens we come to right away that makes a nice connection here is we might think, well, the Garden of Eden. And when we think of the Garden of Eden, we're like, well, who was there? And it was Adam and Eve, and they ate from the tree of knowledge, and then they got booted out of the garden, right? We'll see you later, you're out of paradise. And it's this fall from grace that we have here, but they didn't have knowledge, and then they ate from that fruit. And we have the tree, or we have the knowledge that they gained then, right? So we have this garden, and we think about that, and we're like, well, maybe it's it. Then we have this garden that lines up with the boy here. Our fruit is a bit different. It's a big toe. They do eat that. We have this specific spot, the garden we have at the edge of the garden. And when I think edge of the garden here, and we get into this detail, I think, well, we're in a border ground, in borderland. Anytime we're on the edge of something, we're on the edge of this or this, right? And if we think, we're on the edge of knowledge and not knowledge, and we have a boy who's an innocent, who's going to learn something, and he's on the edge of it, and what does he run into? Well, he runs into a big toe. So we sit down with that detail from the minute, and we can say, well, big toe, that's something directly human. It is a toe, right? And so the boy is coming into contact with something human and possibly on the edge of knowledge here, right? He tries to pick the toe up. The next sentence we get into, he tries to pick it up, and it's stuck to something. And I think right away we think, well, what is a toe stuck to? And we're going to say a foot. And a toe is stuck to a foot. It's probably stuck to a person. And so we might have a corpse here, but it doesn't say he's seen anything else. This thing's a toe sticking out of the ground. And when we think of that, maybe we're sitting there wondering, how is that? What's going on? Maybe somebody's buried somebody out here, and we're talking about a pretty shallow grave. And this is something we often find with ghost stories, that there are pasts. They've tried to be buried away by somebody. But when injustices or hauntings, things that disturb us, try to get buried away, these are ill-fitting containers. They can never contain the ghost. The ghost can go through walls, it can go through doors, it can transcend the barriers of time that we think are impossible. The ghost can cut across those things. And so we know in ghost stories, they can make their way. And here explicitly we have something that's been tried to be, somebody tried to bury it, something or something has tried to bury this, but they couldn't fully cover it up. There's a toe that's sticking out, and when the toe is sticking out, that's enough to make a haunt go on. And here the boy gives that toe a good hard jerk, and it comes off in his hand. And as soon as it comes off in his hand, the last sentence we get in this old gold section here is, it says, he heard something groan and scamper away. So after he pulls it out, he hears something groan and scamper away. He doesn't see a corpse get up out of the ground and go, running missing one toe away. He hears something groan and scamper away. And we look at these reactions, groan and scamper away. We look at these verbs here and we say, well, what are these reactions of? What type of reaction is that? And we find with groan, we're like, well, that's groan when it's painful, right? When Professor Haney tells a dumb joke, we all groan. It is a painful thing to have to experience, right? When we stub our toe, we groan. But here, it's pain. It's a reaction to pain. And scamper away, we're like, well, that's running away. And when do we run away? Well, maybe when we're afraid of something, And so we see the boy has inflicted this, and what he's caused is pain and fear. So now we go on in our story. In our next section here, the boys pluck this toe off of the ground. He's walking around with it. Where does he go? He takes it to the kitchen and he shows it to his mother. Well, that makes a lot of sense to me, right? Because where does a kid go to when he wants knowledge? Well, he goes to his immediate authority figures often. And those happen to be parents, grandparents, people around that he trusts that are guiding him in the world. Kids are dependent, right? They're dependent because they're young, vulnerable people, and they need people looking out for them. And he takes it to his mother. And I totally get this, because my niece and nephews, when I'm out playing in the yard with them, sometimes they like to scoop up a dead bird or something weird off the ground. They're like, Uncle Barney, look. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. No, put that down. Don't touch that. Totally gross. Wash hands. We got to clean up now. That's gross. And they learn not to pick that up because of my reaction, right? But we see this mother's reaction here. He shows it to his mother, and the first thing his mother says is, it looks nice and plump, right? And when we think of what the mother's saying there, if it looks nice and plump, what she's telling the boy, or what she's giving the boy here, we're like, well, that's praise. I mean, it's nice and plump is another way of saying, well done, kiddo. You did good. It's nice and plump. You got a winner here. We got the prize winner. And then she says, I'll put it in the soup and we'll have it for supper. And so the teachings that are going on here, right? Number one is good job done, and then put it in the soup and we'll have it for supper is saying, this is food. Here's the teaching the boy's getting. This is food, which is a resource, which is capital, and we're going to consume it, right? So this is the teaching that the boy's getting here. Good job, and we eat people, right? If this is going to be nourishment for us and not so much nourishment for the person we plucked this from. Now, the next section here, interesting, we go to the father. Father doesn't have a speaking role in this, right? Father comes in that night. Father carved the toe into 3 pieces, and they each had a piece. So we looked at his action here, and we wonder why he doesn't get a speaking role in this thing. And, some assumptions we might start to lay out there, because we always lay out assumptions when we're reading. We might think, in a real sympathetic look, we might say, man, these must be people totally locked into such a painful poverty that they have to eat whatever they can find to survive. And the father knows that, and he's possibly really ashamed of it. And he can't tell the boy, and he knows it's wrong, and they're going to do it anyways because he knows they got to eat to survive. That is the apocalyptic scenario that we're in, and an understanding of a reading there. Or we might have maybe a less sympathetic thing and say, well, maybe that father's a little befuddled, and this is the young breadwinner who's coming in and coming in on his territory here. And the father, he cuts it up into 3 pieces. He's the executor of the capital, right? He's the one who breaks the capital down and distributes it out. So he's executor in this position. He gives them each of a piece. But I think the most important thing to find here, I mean, we can look at gender dynamics and family dynamics that we're seeing here, the power in the family. But what we also note is that the boy gets confirmation of the earlier knowledge that this is indeed food. That this, when we have knowledge that's first given to us, and then another one of our like trusted authority figures reaffirms that learning, it becomes knowledge. Then it solidifies. It's like, okay, this is cool, right? This is knowledge. I've seen it. Mom acted this way, dad acted this way, and now I know, because sometimes I learn by being told, and sometimes I learn by witnessing things. So it's normalized behavior that we're getting. This is the way the world is. This family eats people, and it gets dark. Right? Because I mean, after we eat it, it couldn't do anything but get dark for us, right? And it gets dark. And when it gets dark, they go to bed and the boy falls asleep almost at once. We're in the purple section now. The first line is the boy fell asleep almost at once. And why wouldn't he? Rest easy, kiddo. You did good. You put food on the table. We're all happy here. There's nothing to be worried about. This is awesome. The kid probably is feeling great. I did something spectacular today. I was just fooling around the edge of the garden. I brought food home. We all ate it, man. It was the best soup ever because I brought it, right? But in the middle of the night, right, a sound awakened him. It was something out on the street. It was a voice, and it was calling to him. So he falls asleep because he has nothing to be afraid of. But in the middle of the night, in the dark, he's awakened. And we know at night, right? We think about what that experience is to be in the dark. To be in the dark is to be confused. To be in the middle of the night alone in bed is to be like really vulnerable. A kid who's already vulnerable for just the sheer fact that he's a kid. And now he's really feeling that aloneness at night. And he's waking up in the dark to this sound. But it's in the street, right? And it's a thing in the street. It calls out to him. It groans, "Where's my toe?" The boy hears that and he gets really scared at first, right? He gets very scared, it says. But he thought, it doesn't know where I am. It will never find me. And here, I mean, going back on the knowledge that he's gained, he's like, okay, there's two worlds. There's this world outside of my house and this world inside my house. And what happens out on the street, and maybe the damage we cause out of the street, doesn't matter because in this house we're protected here, right? And it's kind of this, superiority, inferiority mark that he's making here. I'm not worried about what happens on the street. It's just about us here in this house. It can't get me. It doesn't know where I am. It's safe. And mom and dad wouldn't have taught me wrong, right? So he says, it doesn't know where I am. And immediately when he says, it doesn't know where I am, what do we get? He heard the voice call again, only now it was closer. How typical is this, like in a ghost story? The more the character tries to deny it, the more the ghost just gets closer and closer and is just restless and relentless, right? So he says, nope, it doesn't know where I am. It's not going to find me. And now it's closer and it's groaning the same thing. Where is my toe? The next movie does, because it's getting closer. And it's a little creepy now, right? Uh-oh, it might know where I am. And it might be coming to get me. And so what does he do next? Well, he does what any kid would do, right? And they're scared. Pulls the blankets over his head, and maybe a lot of adults do this too. Pulls the blanket over his head and closes his eyes. I'll go to sleep, he thought. When I wake up, it will be gone. Right? How many of us have like pulled this same thing? Never works, right? We try and try and try, and it doesn't work. And here, this idea of pulling the blanket over his eyes, I mean, it's really like, um, just straight up pulling the wool over your eyes. Willful ignorance, right? So the boy is going to like be willfully ignorant and just ignorant it away. And he's going to go to sleep. He's going to pretend all will be fine and dandy when he wakes up. And yet again, like as soon as he does that move, ooh, now we hear it. We hear the back door open, right? The move of like, I'm just going to be willfully ignorant, that gets the back door opened up on your house. All right. And he hears the voice calling. The back door opens and the voice calls. So we know who opened that back door. It's the person who wants their toe back. Where's my toe? Right. And after that, we don't hear much from the boy because he is shutting up at this point because now it's for real. His house has been penetrated, his home, his safety, where that behavior was normalized and where everything was all good and fine and dandy and he'd gotten the praise and he saw that this is all right to do. Now this thing is in that house and look how it moves in his house immediately. Once it gets in that back door in this gray section we're looking at here, then the boy heard the footsteps move through the kitchen, into the dining room, into the living room, into the front hall. Then they slowly climbed the stairs. Well, this ghost has been all over the house at this point. There's no safe place in the house anymore. The ghost has come in and corrupted every like safe spot that this kid could imagine his house. It's gone. The ghost is all through it. The house has become haunted. It is the uncanny, the unhomely. Closer and closer they came. Soon they were upstairs. Now they were outside his door. Where is my toe? And then the jump out and the you got it here. And like I said, the behavior of like the way you speak it, if you speak it in low tones, and you're reading this out to some kids, reading this out to each other around the campfire. The behavioral change of jumping out and turning the next person, shouting the final line, it's fun. It's going to get that scare. But I think there's something, deeper in here that we recognize right away, that maybe we're afraid, and part of the reason we jump is because the whole time we've been hearing this story build up, we realize we've done these same things too to each other, that we've hurt each other in big ways and small, and that we've tried to like push that hurt away and not deal with it. And maybe some of these like ant hills became mountains, and the scare of it has been building up all along. It's been building up in us. When things touch a nerve with us, they conjure our ghosts, they conjure the hauntings that exist within us. And here we see the possibility of this, and this story's real power is like conjuring that up within ourselves, and that scare coming through. Now, my students, they get to the end of this and we talk all about it and they understand it. And then one of the things they get really frustrated about is like, why didn't the parents get gotcha'd by that ghost? A boy gets all the gets all the flack here, and those parents aren't being dealt with, right? And we ask about that because that was a specific choice by the author, right? It's the boy who gets gotcha'd in this story. We don't hear about the parents getting gotcha'd, and they seem pretty darn culpable in this in these actions that happen here. They've done the teaching of this thing, so we wonder about that, and we wonder, why, and what does the boy like maybe represent then, and what might the story be telling us? Well, if we consider like the three characters that we have to choose from here that the story could have been told from and how different that is, we see that like in natural like lifelines, the boy would potentially like in the best case scenario be the longest one to live here, out of this group of the three. And when we see that, we can say, well, often children in stories, and maybe this one as well, boy comes to represent the future, that the children represent the future here. And we're looking at a story that's telling us what happens if we try to be ignorant of past hauntings, if we try to brush aside dehumanization, if we don't try to go back and deal with it. And we see how hard it is to deal with, because he ate the toe. They all ate the toe, which means that wrong can't be righted easily, right? We know what happens to stuff once we eat it. We're not going to give that back to anybody and have it be a good thing or then be happy about it, right? So it's a much more difficult thing to right the wrong that's been done here. And that's often the case when we have dehumanization going on. And the boy is super vulnerable here because he doesn't have that knowledge of how to do this. He's trying to be ignorant. He doesn't have the, the smarts to be able to do it. He's been taught a different thing. He's been taught this is okay. He hasn't been taught how to, make things right in that way. And he gets gotcha'd. And what we learn here is that, if we don't face it, if we don't try it, try to do something better, if we don't teach better, then our future is at risk. Then our future is in peril, that our future is under threat. And in this seemingly just silly story that's maybe just for a jump scare, when we start getting down into the weeds of this and we start thinking about things that's talking about of cultural values and cultural stressors, I think we see some pretty big ones that are in here that speak to European American culture, that are very much prevalent and very much resonating once we get down in the weeds of this piece. Now I'm going to pull my I'm going to take my screen share off here and just come back to you big. This like idea of having to deal with the past, confronting a past to prevent a past from then like consuming you, When there's a traumatic past that's coming on, if we try to just push it away or repress it, like no good will come from that. And this is a trope that comes out again and again and again in some of the best ghost stories that are out there. And these stories, I want you to go get them from your local library, the Monticello Library, and read them because they're so darn good and you're going to love them. First, Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. All right. In this story here, Eleanor Vance, she is doing that same thing as a boy. She has got this real traumatic past with her mother. And I don't want to spoil the story for you. Maybe a lot of you have read it, but she's got this really traumatic past with her mother that she's carrying with her, and she's also got a pretty awful present. In the present, she's living with her sister and her brother-in-law, and they treat her very childishly, and she stays in like their daughter's room, and she doesn't get any stay in what she's doing. Well, she gets an invitation to Hill House, and not only is Eleanor like a haunted individual, but the place that she is going, it is extremely haunted, and it has a very haunted past that she's going towards. But on her way there, she's like imagining all these homes and this new life. She's finally broke free. She's finally escaped, and she's having these fantasies of home. And she keeps telling herself journeys end and lovers meeting. And this is her reaching for this new future and this hope that she's escaped it and something's going to happen to her and she's going to make a connection. But when she gets into that Hill House, that evil that exists in there, it just uncorks all that kind of bent down repression that's in Eleanor. It just uncorks it and it fizzes all over like champagne, and it's a mess everywhere. And everywhere she goes, she starts to see her trauma reflected in the knocking on the walls. She says, "Coming, mother, coming." They open the door to the tower that's a library. That's so cool. I'd love a tower library. And there's a smell of rot that comes out, this decomposing and dead mother, right? Comes out and she pulls back against the wall and she's like, "Mother," and she won't go in there. This towering figure, that smell of rot, that death, this thing that's been conjured up. Eleanor has not taken care of that past, and bad things happen. Bad things happen for Eleanor here, and this isn't a tale of hope, but we can see this, the desires, and the more that she reaches for that desire, that connection, the further it gets away, because that thing just keeps coming up, and it's a relentless, restless force. Another story we see this happening in a different variation. You can get this from your library. Stephen King's The Shining. All right, this fun one, genre, right? It's scary. There's some stuff in there that's just straight up for scares. But if we think about like how this idea plays through it of taking care of that past, we've got this family of three, right? We've got Jack, Wendy, and little Danny Torrance, and they're going to the Overlook hotel because Jack's got a job as a winter caretaker because of his violence and drunkenness has caused him to lose his job at the school that he's teaching at, and really lose all his social status and all his like clout and respect in his community. And he's going out there and he thinks, well, if I'm out here, he gets a job through a buddy who's trying to help him, and one of his drinking buddies trying to help him get straight, which is a good deal. And he goes out there and he's like, if I can just finish this play, I'm going to become like the best American playwright ever, and everything will be fine then, and that'll all take care of it, and there's nothing to worry about, right? There's much to worry about. Jack's got a big ghost in him of his father. This story follows kind of like inheritance and genetic things that are passed down, and there's the substance abuse of his father, the violence that his father committed against his mother. And when he goes into that Overlook, that place also very much haunted, very containing all these power positions of America, from presidents that have been there, mobsters that have been there, all kinds of incredible, like disgusting human violence that's been done in this place. And that stuff gets a hold of Jack. All those years of history of that place are existing in the Overlook. All those years of history and Jack are existing there. And those things, as much as Jack tries to push him away, he can't. This is not a story of hope. Things do not end well for Jack Torrance, but we have people coming together, and it does end pretty well for them, and a well worth reading. Now, one of the books that does this, plays with this idea, and far more in like exceptional ways. And for me, the best ghost story ever written, and one of the best books ever written, Toni Morrison's Beloved. And here in this story, we have very much at the start, the character Setha in Denver, living in the haunted house number 124 on Bluestone Road, and there is a haunting of a baby that's in this place. I mean, just think of like how horrible a story starts off with the haunting of a baby in this place. And Setha has escaped slavery, but in many ways, she's still being held by the bondage of her traumatic past. And each day she spends her day protecting her daughter by beating away that past in some way, shape, or form. When she's kneading bread, she's beating away the past in her kneading of the bread. If memories come too close, she starts folding laundry. She does something physical, anything to like push it away, push it back, be gone because she can't deal with it. This happens again and again in the story where she's pushing it back. But what happens very early in this novel, Paul D comes around. Paul D is from her past, and he was with her at Sweet Home at the plantation she was held in bondage on, and knows like horrible things that happened to her, and she knows the horrible things that happened to him, and good and bad come up when he comes around. But it's like anybody from your past, they're going to conjure up those memories. But what Paul D also brings with him is an opportunity for a life. And Sethi says, a life, a life. Like she just can't imagine like the possibility of having a life and a future, because that past has been so much dominating her present that she doesn't even have a present. She is so locked in the past. But Paul D is there. And as Setha moves towards that desire of a life, and Paul D's helping her out, and Paul D's working through his own ghost. That dude is haunted big time too. But man, that ghost manifests and comes up, and Setha is going to have to go through that ghost to get there. That's the only way for her to get there. And she gets some big help in this story. It's awesome. Denver daughter helps her. The community who outcast her comes back around to help her, and Paul D is there the whole way to show her that she's an awesome individual and well worth it, and that they deserve a life. It is such a story of hope, versus the other two. There's not a lot of hope that ends up in those, but this one teaches us that we can regain what we thought was forever lost. This one helps us talk about the things that are so incredibly difficult to talk about. The ghost allows us to get there, to face it, and to make big healings that can bring our cultures back, that can heal our cultures, that can promise a hope and a bright future for all of us. So check out those stories. I mean, there's how cool ghost stories are, and how big the human ideas that are in there in stories that we might just read for the scare. Look a little more closely, pay attention to what it is that's really scaring us, and see those human elements in there. You can get a little more enjoyment from these things that are crazy enjoyable. Thank you so much, everyone.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for presenting this program tonight. It was very interesting seeing that breakdown of the big toe. I don't even think maybe I've heard of it. I don't know. Just don't remember the whole thing. But it was very interesting, especially a part to know they ate it. So but speaking of ghost stories, we do have some here that I have to share. So this is the Haunted Hoosier Halls, Indiana University.
Ooh.
Yeah. There is more Haunted Hoosier Trails. And then this is close by, so Haunted Lafayette.
Oh.
And we have some more too. So,
How
stop in.
cool. Can
Yeah.
I recommend one more? Colin Dickey's Ghostland, Haunted Places, an American History and Haunted Places. And your books are doing that. Dickey said, like, if you go to a place and you want to really learn about the history and the people there, he says, don't go looking around their war monuments stuff. Ask what their ghost stories are. And you'll get to know their communities and get to know their values and the things that are, the stressors to them. Such great books, Candace. This is such good recommendations.
Yeah, and we do have one for Monticello too. So I didn't find it. I think it's been checked out, of course, during this time. It would be. Um, but please like this video. Please follow us on Facebook. We do have more upcoming Halloween programs, especially next week and the rest of this month going on. And I'll put a link in the YouTube event so that you can get to our website and see our calendar. So, yeah, thank you for
You told
joining
me it was
us.
going to be Dracula. Dracula's the next one, right?
Yes, yeah, it's on Vampire Myths. So, yeah, should be interesting. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Candace.